Hello, fellow rebel capitalists. Hope you're well. Breaking news: Joe Biden signs a bill banning goods from a certain part of China. So let's get straight into the article. This is from CNN. And I mean, most of you understand economics well enough to realize this could have a massive impact on the amount of stuff that we have available to us. If you haven't been following the story, our trade deficit prior to the cerveza sickness was about $40 billion per month. But what happened? Well, we locked everyone in a cage. We forced small and mid-sized businesses to shut down. Hundreds of thousands of them absolutely just went bust. Then we paid people to stay home, stimmy checks, PPP, child tax credits. You don't have to pay your rent, you don't have to pay your mortgage, etc. Then it creates this labor shortage. Well, if people are not working, what are they also not doing? They're not creating goods and services. So we've seen our trade deficit explode, gone from 40 to over $80 billion. I haven't checked in the last couple of weeks, but a couple weeks ago it was over $80 billion. That was an all-time high. So what's happened is demand has stayed the same, if not increased, because of all the stimmy checks. But this creation of the goods and services has decreased dramatically. Therefore, our dependence to get those goods from other countries, i.e., China, has doubled since the beginning of the cerveza sickness. So I had a fabulous person that I worked for when I was an entrepreneur. I sold a business for him, and I was working for him as a consultant, and he taught me an incredible amount about not just business, but about life in general. But he gave me some tips, and he was maybe 65 years old at the time. He had been a CEO of all these major corporations, so he had just a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge and wisdom that he was kind enough to give to me. And one of the things he always told me is he said, "Listen, you never want to fire someone just because you're pissed off. You never want to fire, meaning that you never want to fire someone just because they're doing a bad job." He says, "You've got to time it right. Because let's say someone is doing a horrible job, they deserve to be fired. They're not showing up to work. They're getting in the way of other people doing their work, whatever the case may be." He says you never want to just fire them right away, because that puts you at a deficit. Now all of a sudden you're screwing yourself by firing that person. So once you decide that you need to fire someone, then what you have to do is you have to hire around them, or you have to find someone that you know of that can take their place immediately. If you don't do that, you're going to be putting yourself behind the eight ball, was really his message. And obviously that really resonated. And I didn't always heed his words. Sometimes I felt that person just needed to go. And even if I was going to put myself behind the eight ball, I needed to do it. But through the years, I've tried to implement that strategy, and it's worked very well. So for those of you who are entrepreneurs, or maybe aspiring entrepreneurs, or in the beginning stages of your entrepreneurial journey, make sure you do that. If you need to fire someone, don't fire them until you've got someone to replace them. What's my point? How does that pertain to this story? Because Joe Biden doesn't understand what I learned about 20 years ago. Because we are heavily dependent on China, far more so than we were just in 2019 prior to the cerveza sickness. So they are that employee. And even if your argument is we need to fire that employee, we don't have anyone to replace them. And not only is this an employee, but this is an employee that our entire business is dependent on. They're not just, someone that answers the phone and you can find someone probably within a week or two to replace them. I mean, this is a key employee that you cannot live without. And what we're doing is or potentially, Biden is firing this employee before he has someone to replace them. So you guys also know, because you've gone to the grocery store in the last month, there's, at least in a lot of areas in the United States, we have huge supply shortages. And this is one of the reasons why we've seen consumer prices go up to the degree that they've gone up. I mean, just think of chip shortages. And what did that do to new cars? Well, that made it so you can't make a new car, therefore you can't sell a new car, therefore you can't buy a new car. Therefore, if you need another vehicle, your only option is to get a used car. So what does that do to the prices of used cars? Absolutely skyrockets. And this was just because we couldn't get a little teeny weeny computer chip that we needed for, or multiple computer chips that we needed for all of these new cars. You see, these knock-on effects are what the politicians just don't understand. They're not capable because, number one, they don't care because they're sociopaths. And number two, I don't think a lot of them are even intelligent enough to see beyond what's right in front of their nose. They see what is in front of them. They can't see the unseen, as Hazlitt says in his book Economics in One Lesson. So let's go through this article. So U.S. President Biden on Thursday signed law into legislation that bans imports from China's Xinjiang, I'm guessing that's the way to pronounce that, region over concerns about forced labor. And this is where it gets ironic, is not even the appropriate word. You'll see what I'm talking about here. The White House said, provoking an angry Chinese condemnation. So this, I have no idea how to pronounce this. Uyghur, we'll say, Forced Labor Prevention Act is part of the U.S. pushback against Beijing's treatment of China's Muslim minority, which Washington has labeled genocide. A key to the legislation is a rebuttal presumption that assumes all goods from Xinjiang, where Beijing has established detention camps for these Muslim groups, are made with forced labor. It bars imports unless it can be proven otherwise. So it's not just saying, okay, we want to make sure that this isn't coming from this area, or forced labor wasn't used to produce these goods. It's saying that we're assuming all the goods are produced with forced labor unless you can somehow prove I don't know how the heck they'd prove otherwise. And also, even if they can prove otherwise, just think how much bureaucracy is involved in that, right? And so think about how this will translate into even greater supply shortages than we are already experiencing. And therefore, how will that translate to the prices of stuff that we do have goes up? And what does that do to the standard of living for the poor and middle class? So I get it. You want to be a do-gooder. Fine. You want to reduce forced labor. That's great. But remember, there are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. So if you're able to somehow punk Beijing into reducing their forced labor, assuming they have it, I mean, how do we know this isn't propaganda? I don't know. But assuming that this is what they're doing, you can have some sort of ban on goods and services to try to force them to do what you want them to do. Ironically, they're forcing China to do what they want them to, and what they don't want them, and what they don't like about what China's doing is that it's forced labor. So they don't want China to force people to do something, but yet we want to force China to do something. Okay, you can start to see the irony here, but my main point is we have to understand that this is not a solution. This is only going to be a trade-off, assuming that it works in the first place. So what type of goods? So cotton, tomato, polysilicon used in solar panel manufacturing are designated high priority for enforcement action. So maybe you're someone that believes in clean air, or you want to have clean energy. All right, well, we're not going to have as many solar panels. So that is a trade-off here. So its Washington embassy said that act ignores the truth and maliciously slanders the human rights situation in Xinjiang. I don't know if it does or doesn't. I'm not an expert in that area. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Again, my thing is we have to do a cost benefit analysis, and we have to understand that there are going to be trade-offs. Now, here is where it takes the level of irony goes to a completely different level, like an insane level. Now we can finally ensure that American consumers and businesses can buy goods without without inadvertent complicity in China's horrific human rights abuses. China's got the human right abuses? What about the Biden administration coming in with mandates? What about here in the United States, we are forcing people to inject a foreign substance into their body to go to work. That's not a human right abuse? I mean, what are you talking about? Like how can we as Americans, and I shouldn't say we, how can the administration and the people in favor of this be so ignorant as to what they themselves are doing to their fellow Americans? I mean, this is staggering. Number one, we're condemning forcing people to do something by forcing China to do something. Number two, we are condemning horrific human rights abuses against workers while we are at the same time forcing people to inject a foreign substance into their body to go to work. Unbelievable. You really can't make this stuff up. And that's what's going on with the Biden administration. So takeaways here, guys. Obviously, the irony with the medicine mandates and forcing people to do something against their will. We talked about that, but how this pertains to economics directly is if this goes through, which it looks like it has. Just expect this to exacerbate the problem of the supply shortages that we have, I guess, gotten accustomed to for over the last few months, and expect that to translate into higher prices in the future. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, guys. Always stand up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism. We'll